So why are we here? Over the past months, in preparation for the legalization of recreational cannabis, the city has collaborated with internal and external partners, including bylaw enforcement, Brampton Fire and Emergency Services, Peel Regional Police, and the Region of Peel to identify potential community impacts and mitigation measures. So today, we'll be discussing how those who choose to consume or grow non-medical cannabis can do so safely. We will begin with individual messages from each of our speakers, followed by an opportunity for questions and then photos. I would just like to note, if there are any city-related inquiries today that cannot be addressed, I'm happy to take those back and provide an update at a later time. So now, I'd like to introduce the members of today's panel in their speaking order. To my left, we have Jean-Pierre Maurice, Manager of Bylaw Enforcement, City of Brampton. Then we have Andrew Von Holt, Division Chief, Fire Prevention, Brampton Fire and Emergency Services. To his left, we have Manny Rodriguez, Superintendent, Peel Regional Police, and Tony Malarney, Detective Sergeant, Peel Regional Police. Thank you all for participating today. So, to kick things off, I will now invite JP to speak to the enforcement of recreational cannabis.
Good morning. As of tomorrow, August 17, 2018, the use of recreational cannabis will be legal in Ontario. With the information that we currently have, the use of cannabis will be prohibited in areas where tobacco is prohibited. If additional legislative changes are made by the province, the city is committed to enforce them. Therefore, smoking of cannabis will be regulated the same as smoking tobacco. Some examples of prohibited areas include enclosed public places and workplaces, schools and places where children gather, within 9 meters of any entrance or exit of a hospital, within 20 meters of children's playgrounds and publicly owned sport fields and surfaces, transit terminals and bus shelters, reserved seating areas at outdoor sports and entertainment locations, and within 9 meters of bar patios. Enforcement of recreational cannabis is a team effort, which is why we have our partners here today. We're asking that if residents have any inquiries or concerns regarding the illegal use of cannabis, to call 311. City of Brampton, along with the Region of Peel, will investigate smoking complaints on city-owned properties such as municipal buildings, recreation centers, transit shelters, in close proximity to children's play areas, including within parks. The city's noise and public nuisance bylaws and smoke bylaw could apply in response to disturbance complaints. The city will also direct relevant inquiries to the Region of Peel, Peel Regional Police, and or the Alcohol and Gaming Commission Ontario as required. Bylaws are in place to keep our community safe and enjoyable. We look forward to the public's cooperation in the safe and responsible use of recreational cannabis.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. I would now like to call upon Division Chief Van Holt to speak. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. The fire service is concerned potentially with the impact of cannabis, and some of the messaging that we want to provide today is to make sure that if you're smoking cannabis, it's being regulated the same as tobacco, and that you should be responsible and use it in a safe manner to protect your family and your property. And so you should make sure you have working smoke alarms and working CO alarms in your home. Smoking, we know that 30% of all fatal fires over the past 5 years are caused by improperly discarded smoking material. So we're concerned with that, and we want to make sure that cannabis is disposed properly when smoking it. Cooking, when it comes to cooking, cooking is the #1 cause of home fires and the leading cause of fire and deaths and burns. So we're concerned the influence of cannabis while cooking. So we do not recommend, we're advising cannabis users not to cook while under the influence. Growing, when it comes to growing, the law permits up to 4 cannabis plants in your home. So, we're concerned. We know that sometimes compressed carbon monoxide cylinders are being used to increase the yields of growing, and that's a concern to us when there is a house fire. Firefighters have to go into those homes, and those compressed cylinders can be dangerous to our firefighters and to the occupants of the home. The use of high heat lamps to grow these plants are a concern, and they can melt exposed wiring when growing these plants and can cause fires. And we also have concerns of wiring issues. When your people are growing more than 4 plants, they're using illegal wiring, and these are an impact on fires in some of these houses, so we're concerned about that. And another thing that we're concerned about is the use of butane to make hash oil, which is known as shatter. And this is a very dangerous process, and it uses highly flammable gas, butane, to extract the oil from marijuana plants, and we don't recommend it at all, and it's a very dangerous process. And we know that some data from Colorado shows that they saw an increase of almost 50% explosions in homes since the legalization of marijuana in that state. So those are some of the concerns we have. We don't know what the full impact will be for fire and emergency services, but those are some of our concerns.
Thank you. I'd now like to pass things along to Superintendent Manny Rodriguez and Detective Sergeant Tony Malarney to speak on behalf of Peel Regional Police.
Good morning. My responsibility is the officer in charge of community support services. In January of 2018, Chief Evans directed that a committee be set up to anticipate the legalization of marijuana. Tony Malarney, who's Detective Sergeant with Narcotics, chairs the committee, and I was assigned senior officer oversight to ensure that that we were ready. Our approach was took into consideration the need for us to work collaboratively with our partners. That's one of the reasons why we're here today in support of Brampton Fire, and also to ensure that the citizens weren't being bounced around when it came to getting information from us. So we looked at our internal processes and what we had to deal with from a human resources perspective. We also looked at how we would make sure that the community received the information that they needed to receive, not only in regards to safety, but also in regards to knowing the law. And then, of course, we ensured, and Tony met frequently with JP Maurice and also Mr. Calder from the City of Mississauga to make sure that we were in tune with what bylaw had planned to deal with the changes. Our focus on the policing side really is related to safety, and that in as much is the importance of ensuring that people don't drive while they are impaired. It has always been illegal to drive while impaired by drugs, and it continues to be illegal. We wanted to ensure that we had the resources in place to deal with what can be expected to be an uptick in the need to address the concern. And then, of course, the other concern is how this impacts our youth. And the legislation is pretty strict when it comes to selling to people under the age of 19, and if that is really one of our focuses when it comes to things like that. Some of the typical questions that we get asked is, how will this have an impact on our organization? It's very difficult to say. We have put some measures in place, some policies in place to try to measure what the impact is, and we really won't be able to answer that question until legalization takes effect. Everyone speaks about the fact that legalization is tomorrow and what will change. Well, really nothing should change until the weekend, because you can only order legal marijuana online. It'll take you 3 days to get it. So anybody smoking over the next 2 days will be smoking illegal marijuana. But that really isn't a concern for us right now. The hope is that that we will move on and be able to deal with whatever factors come into play. Tony can speak to some of the conversations that he has had with, especially the staff with the 311. What we don't want is for citizens to get bounced around between the police and the information numbers provided by the region. so that there's a consistent message that goes out. We do have a concern that the uptick may be in the calls to our communications bureau. We need to stress once again that 911 is absolutely only for emergencies, and that people that don't have an emergency, if they have a question, they can either call the regular police number at 905-453-3311 or 311, and I'll let Tony elaborate in that regard, but please do not call 911 when you have any questions that relates to the legalization of marijuana. Tony?
Good morning. We identified earlier on at the onset of our committee that collaboration was going to be the key. We also knew that we had various stakeholders within the community, both private and enforcement and other public safety units. We collaborated with City Mississauga, City of Brampton in regards to responsibilities, and we kept informed as the amendments from the provincial governments came down at the end of September. We have spoke to our 311 operators, and we've really hashed out whose responsibility was going to be to attend or to respond to any type of community complaints. We didn't want a overlap of response, and we didn't want unnecessary and unwarranted police and or bylaw or corporate security response. So I think we were successful in that. We have a very good working relationship with the City of Brampton, bylaw services, and we were able to hammer out whose responsibility it was going to be to attend any complaints that came in. The day approaches tomorrow. It's been a long haul. I can confidently say we're as ready as we're going to be, and that was as a result of the collaboration. Moving forward, we have other steps. As everyone knows, there's a second phase in this with the driving laws coming into effect, and that'll be the next stage of our committee work to ensure that everyone, especially Peel Regional Police, are ready for the amendments. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. So we will now open up for questions. I'd kindly ask that you introduce yourself and the outlet you are from when selected and who you will be directing your questions to. So, Brandon.
So, Brandon Rowe with CTV News. Just have a quick question for Jean-Pierre. As far as fines go, do we know how much tickets could be for people that are caught breaking some of these rules?
Depending which act or bylaw that will fall under, it can go up to $10,000. If it's the Cannabis Act, which the city bylaw enforcement officers do not have the authority to enforce, they'll be up to the police at that point. So in Ontario, it will be a provincial act. But in terms of bylaws, we're talking about a few $100s in fines, potentially.
I think just one more for Jean-Pierre and Andrew, as Tony said. On your part, you guys feel pretty confident. What about you guys? How are you guys feeling? Tomorrow's a huge day. How are you guys feeling?
Yeah, I think, when the fire emergency service is always prepared to attend for an emergency, and, we don't know what the full impact will be, and so, yeah, we're absolutely ready.
I think our officers are well informed based on what we know currently in terms of what this whole legalization of cannabis will be. So I think they'll be prepared to answer some of the questions from the public while they're patrolling the city. This is going to be a learn as we go type thing, but I think we're well equipped now to deal with those issues.
Apologize, my last one for Andrew, Tony. Have you guys, thought about how difficult that might be, or are you guys prepared for how you're going to police, just making sure that people are following the rules?
Well, we have been in consultation with our training bureau over the last few months. We've had to adjust as the legislation has changed. Royal assent doesn't occur until today, so we haven't posted our frequently asked questions on our website just yet to see what the final bill looks like. But we are confident in the approach that our officers will take. We still have some questions of the province and also the federal government when it comes to some of those offenses and how they get processed through the courts. And we will adjust to those. We have necessary process in place as a substitute for the clarification that we may request from them. But but we're ready as we can be. The Ontario Police College just distributed their training materials as well. That will be added to our officers. So the training program for the frontline officers has been going on for the last couple of months. It's had to be readjusted when the provincial government changed the legislation that had been proposed by the Liberal government. So we've adjusted in that regard, and we are now starting training in regards to Bill C-46, which is the impaired driving legislations and modifications that come into effect in December as well too. So as Tony had mentioned, we are as ready as we can be, and we're able to adapt whatever changes the legislation may thrust upon us.
Thank you.
Were the officers given any special training on how to recognize if the driver is a repeat offender?
We have the main training, the training that has been developed is SFST, which is standard field sobriety tests, and the drug recognition experts that we have as well. That was put in place months ago to ensure that we had sufficient officers that were qualified in that regard. We contributed actually 4 officers to the Ontario Police College to not only help train our officers in Peel, but throughout the province as well. So we have sufficient officers that are qualified in that regard. The drug recognition officers, that course takes a little longer than the standard field sobriety test course does. It involves officers having to do the final week of the 3-week course in the United States for various reasons. But we are ready, and we're making ourselves, we avail ourselves of all the other resources that exist, including roadside screening devices.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you.
How do we know the police officers are fit for their daily duty every day? Do they have to do the medical check before they get on the station?
Well, the decision as to which direction we took when it came to establishing policy for our staff was one that was undertaken in consultation with our association and with our Human Resources Department. Ultimately, for us in Peel Region, unlike in Toronto, we've decided to go the route of fit for duty. And that is more in line that we're not going to try to regulate the legal consumption of marijuana by our members. The expectation is that they will not compromise their safety, they will not compromise the safety of their peers or the community, and the expectation is that they will report and remain fit for duty when they report for work. Really, we don't dictate when a person should have a last drink of alcohol before they show up to come to work. The expectation is they come to work ready to fulfill their responsibilities, and that's the approach we are taking in that regard. There are already provisions under the Police Act that govern discipline when it comes to people reporting for duty when they're unfit to report for duty, and really it came down to, in consultation with the association, that our focus was the safety of our members, the safety of the community, and a health and safety approach as opposed to one that seeks to police it. So when they report for duty, that's a responsibility of the supervisor to determine whether or not there are any issues. It really isn't that different from alcohol. We've been dealing with alcohol issues for many years, and the expectations of supervisors is when it comes to alcohol that they identify any concerns and they deal with it appropriately, whether they let the person report for duty or not.
Thank you, Superintendent.
This
Thank you.
is a federal law. A concern that the Mayor of Toronto has expressed is that it may be a federal law, but the burden for security and policing falls onto municipalities and police departments, and that it may stretch resources and put pressure on an already stretched police department. Do you share those concerns, and are you hoping that maybe the federal government will step up with some extra funding to help alleviate those pressures?
Well, one of the questions that was put to us is, are we hiring anybody, additional officers in regards to this legislation? We're not hiring any additional officers specific to this legislation. Obviously, our personnel deployment can adapt to short-term changes that are required. We have put procedures and policy into place to try to measure what the impact is, and really we can't answer that question until it's legalized, and we've had a few weeks or months to try to appreciate whether or not there has been a change or there's an impact. It's funny, when the conversations at the committee became, someone suggested that perhaps this will be like Y2K, where everybody works so hard to try to, you know, plan for the worst, and in the end, nothing happened. And I mean, that would be the best case scenario, but we are prepared if it becomes otherwise. And if our data that is analyzed months later suggests that there has been a real increase in demand, then we'll make the changes and make the requests as are required. Our concern now really is that we don't inundate the Communications Bureau with additional calls. They're stretched as it is to respond to 911 calls, and the hope is that at the front end that will be curtailed, and it won't be. That's where I think it will be. If there's any uptick, I think that's where it will be felt, and hopefully people will be mindful of the importance of availing themselves of other resources like 311 and the regular police number as well.
This may sound like an odd question, but if marijuana becomes legal tomorrow, but the only place you can buy it technically legally is online until April. So if you see people smoking tomorrow, the day after, or in the coming weeks and months, do you have any concerns about where it came from? Do you probably know where it came from, or you just kind of leave it be and, you know, it's legal, it's fine?
We have concerns. Are we going to enforce it? I think you'd have to establish where it came from. I don't know that that would serve a purpose. Really, our focus now at the outset is safety, and everybody's safety. And as far as the technicality of enforcing the law, I think discretion is the better part of valor in many cases.
Do you expect a spike in bail driving cases once it is legalized?
I think the best practice is always to learn from other jurisdictions that have already gone through this. So we learned. We studied a few reports. One of them being the Colorado report. And was there a spike? There was a reported spike in certain offenses, and that could be attributed to many things. It just so happened that the legalization in Colorado occurred at the same time, and there was a spike in petty offenses. There was a spike in driving while impaired. But a lot of it comes down to public education and community safety and community awareness in regards to this. And I think the province has set down some pretty good legislation and really reiterated they don't want driving while you're drinking and smoking at the same time. That will just exaggerate your ability or you think your ability to drive is proper when it won't be. We've learned from them. We have a process in place to track any type of cannabis-related offense, and we call it cannabis because there's many different derivatives from marijuana, that being the oils, as the chief said, the shatter, things like that. So over the next year, we will track it, and we're also tracking any type of related offense, which could be a petty theft, it could be a domestic incident. Peel Regional Police will continue to track it, and then after the year, we'll study it, and we should be able to see if we have experienced the same as Colorado has.
Field sobriety tests are obviously not as exact as blood alcohol content. Do you have any concerns about the long-term effects of this field sobriety test violations, potential future court challenges, that kind of thing?
There will be court challenges to all the legislation. It's made more difficult when the prosecution has to rely on what is expert witness of an officer and doesn't have the benefit, as has been well established through alcohol, of the resources that go with scientific resources that go with that. But we feel that we're ready to prosecute people that drive while they are impaired. The legislation is in place. It always has been in place, and it just means that our officers have to be well trained, both in what they do on the road and how they perform on the stand.
Thank you.
Just one more question. I know that there was a couple weeks ago the Premier spoke about whether you're able to smoke in parks versus
defer to JP, but I'll say ahead of time, the bill receives royal assent today. And so we can't be certain. I mean, we have our belief, but when it comes to playgrounds and parks, I'll defer to JP.
So we'll fall under this Smoke-Free Ontario Act, which is what they're presenting on, proposing as far as legislation. So that will prohibit any sort of cannabis smoking in the parks, 20 meters from the playgrounds, indoor rec centers, workplaces, places like that. So technically, you could walk in a trail. If there's no playgrounds, we're going and smoke a joint. Sit on the park where there's no playgrounds, you could technically smoke. So we're hoping that the public will be reasonable when they're using cannabis, and when you have an individual beside you in the park, and if it's bothering somebody, perhaps move away. So this is all being looked at as we move forward. We don't know what the reaction of people are going to be, but for the most part, there's certain areas that you can smoke cannabis as if smoking tobacco.
Thank you.
Can you give an example of, you mentioned the noise and public nuisance bylaw. Can you give an example of when that would come into play in relation to cannabis?
Assuming that there's a party at a residence and they're smoking cannabis, so there's potentially our ability to investigate under the nuisance, the public nuisance bylaw or the noise. Instead of looking at the cannabis violations, we would look at those two violations into the noise bylaw and the public nuisance bylaw. So sometimes the parties at residences will have cannabis involved, alcohol involvement, and noise. So we can deal with it from a noise and public nuisance sort of perspective instead of looking at the cannabis.
And have you all seen an uptick in inquiries from the public on this to this point, or are you expecting it to come after? And if so, what are the most common questions that you're getting?
I think some of the question is, where can I smoke? Where is it prohibited? Who do I contact to get additional information? Those are some of the questions that are most likely going to be asked. Private retailers, we may very well get some of those phone calls. How do we go about it to obtain a license? So there's some of the questions we anticipate are going to be asked to our 311 operators, and to be able to respond to their questions.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any outstanding questions?
Actually, I have one question. Later on, these plants are, people can go there in the backyard. So these plants, sometimes they are big, like you can get even a 1 kg, 2 kgs of the marijuana, but allowed is only 30 grams. So are you looking for the black market, or how the bylaw will handle this?
I think we will continue to investigate the illicit sale of marijuana, as you said, with the black market. We have done so from the very beginning, and I think that's why our municipality has been successful in reducing the number of illicit dispensaries within our region. As the superintendent has said, the only legal place to buy cannabis will be online until April with the Cannabis Store of Ontario. But Peel Regional Police will be committed to, as with any other type of legislation, if you're selling cannabis products or cannabis, you will be investigated, and if charges warranted, you will be charged.
Okay. Any more questions? Wonderful. Thank you. That concludes today's information session. Thank you so much, everyone.